My name is Dr. Kate Sullivan, and for 8 years I've worked in emergency medicine. I used to believe I'd seen it all: overdoses, mangled car crash victims, domestic assaults gone too far, heart attacks at 3 a.m. The human body can endure impossible trauma, and the human mind can fracture in ways you can't always measure. But what happened during my shift last October still creeps into my dreams. It left a mark on me I'm not sure will ever fade. I work at Mercy General, a mid-sized hospital in what was once a sleepy suburb but has grown restless over the years. It isn't the busiest ER in the state, but on weekend nights the chaos has its rhythm: alcohol-fueled mistakes, risky decisions, and the occasional tragedy. Most of my colleagues stick to the daytime grind, but I've always been a night owl. There's something about the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift that calls to me. The hospital hums differently then. It's quieter, like it's holding its breath. Shadows stretch longer, footsteps echo further. The pace slows just enough for you to think between patients. And yet, I've always felt, though I could never explain why, that the night hides things the day won't show you. That particular night began like any other. I clocked in at 10:45, grabbed a burnt-smelling coffee from the break room, and checked in with Dr. Hayes as he wrapped up his shift. Nothing unusual on the board. A few minor injuries waiting in triage, an elderly woman with chest pains that seemed more like panic than cardiac arrest, and a teenager who'd sliced his hand on a car engine. Textbook Tuesday night stuff. The first few hours passed like routine. I diagnosed anxiety in the chest pain patient, stitched up the teen's hand, and floated through a handful of cases so unremarkable they barely imprinted on my memory. By 2:30 a.m., there had slowed to an eerie quiet. I was actually catching up on paperwork, something that almost never happens. That was when the ambulance call came in. The paramedics sounded uneasy. A 34-year-old male, found unconscious in his apartment by a neighbor who reported hearing screaming. No obvious trauma, vitals stable, but the man was completely unresponsive. They had tried everything: pain stimuli, verbal commands, even ammonia salts. Nothing. He was breathing on his own, heart rate steady, but it's like nobody's home, one medic had muttered over the radio. When they wheeled him in, I got my first look at him. Average build, brown hair, pajama pants and a t-shirt. No outward injuries. Clean clothes. Everything about him screamed normal, but my gut twisted the moment I saw his face. His expression wasn't just blank, it was empty, like a painting of a person rather than a living man. His eyes were wide open, fixed on the ceiling, unblinking. I began the usual checks. "Can you hear me?" I asked. "Can you squeeze my hand?" Nothing. Pupils reactive to light, good. Blood pressure normal, oxygen saturation perfect, temperatures slightly elevated but not alarming. By every metric, he should have been awake and speaking to me. Faint at first, and yet he was unreachable. Antiseptic and disinfectant. But as I leaned closer, it grew unmistakable: soil. Rich, damp earth. The kind you smell in a garden after heavy rain. The paramedics swore they'd found him indoors. His clothes were clean. It made no sense. I ordered the standard workup: blood tests, CT scan, tox screen, and had him moved to bed 3 in the far corner of the ER. It's the quietest spot, away from the usual foot traffic. Something about his condition seemed to belong there. I assumed we were looking at some unusual seizure disorder, maybe a rare reaction to medication. Weird cases happen. Work in medicine long enough, and you learn to expect the unexpected. The test results came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol, no infection or metabolic imbalance. The CT scan showed a perfectly normal brain. By all accounts, this was a healthy 34-year-old man who should have been awake and alert. Yet he lay there, staring at nothing. At 4:15 a.m., I was reviewing his labs when Jenny, one of our most seasoned night nurses, appeared at the desk. I'd never seen her look like that, her face pale, eyes darting toward the back of the... Jenny has been doing nights longer than I have, and she doesn't spook easily. "Dr. Sullivan," she said, voice low. "You need to see something in bed 3. I followed her, my pulse ticking faster though I didn't know why. As we entered the corner where the patient lay, the change hit me instantly. The temperature had dropped, noticeably, unnaturally. It wasn't just cooler. It was cold. Like stepping into a refrigerator. My breath wasn't quite visible, but it felt close. Something in that corner of the air was wrong. And in the back of my mind, a whisper I couldn't yet name told me this night would not end like the others. I scanned the room, half expecting to find a broken air conditioning vent or a faulty thermostat to explain the sudden chill. Hospitals are old buildings. Weird drafts happen all the time. But everything looked normal, too normal. The patient lay exactly as I had left him, flat on his back, eyes open, staring upward. Only now, I could see his breath condensing in faint, ghostly puffs, and the smell of soil had thickened, richer and heavier, like freshly turned earth at a graveside. "How long has it been this cold in here?" I asked Jenny, keeping my voice low without really knowing why. "It just started about 10 minutes ago," she said. "I came to check his vitals, and it was like stepping into a freezer." I moved toward the bed, my pulse quickening despite myself. That was when I saw it. His lips moving. Barely. Almost imperceptible. But they were definitely moving. I leaned closer, straining to hear, but there was no sound. His mouth was shaping words silently, over and over, the same rhythm, like a mantra. I fished a penlight from my pocket and angled it toward his face, trying to catch the movement in his mouth. It took several long, tense moments to piece together the shapes of the words. When I finally did, my stomach tightened. "They're coming up. They're coming up. They're coming up." I stepped back, the air suddenly feeling heavier. The rational part of my mind leapt for an explanation. Some kind of neurological episode, a dream state repetition, an altered consciousness. Those happen. They're documented. But the cold air, the soil smell, the whispering lips, it all felt wrong in a way I couldn't name. I decided to change tactics. Instead of trying to wake him, I pulled a chair to his bedside and sat down, speaking softly as though to someone who might be able to hear from far away. "Can you tell me your name?" I asked. "Do you know where you are?" And then, for the first time since he'd arrived, something shifted. His lips stilled. His eyes, which had been fixed on the ceiling, slowly moved to meet mine. Not his head. His head stayed perfectly still, but his eyes tracked me. I've seen thousands of patients in altered states, but I'd never seen eyes like that. They were awake, present, and full of a terror so raw it clawed at me. It was like watching someone drown in silence, reaching for help they couldn't speak for. "What's happening to you?" I whispered before I could stop myself. His mouth opened wider, and for a heartbeat I thought he was going to answer. But instead, the smell of soil surged, so overwhelming it was like a grave had opened under the bed. And then I heard it, the sound I will never forget. Scratching. Not the faint scuttle of a mouse or the squeak of a bed frame, but deliberate, slow, like fingernails or claws, dragging across wood. It was coming from beneath the bed, or the floor, or somewhere lower. I looked down, expecting to see dropped equipment or maybe an animal. But the standard hospital flooring stared back at me. Empty. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, and the patient's eyes widened in panic. His lips moved again, but this time I heard the faintest whisper, rasping through the cold air. "They're coming up. They're coming up." That was the moment my composure cracked. My body acted before my brain could reason. I stood so fast the chair clattered backward, and I backed away from the bed. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of that corner, away from him, away from whatever this was. I found myself practically running back to the nurse's station, where Jenny was typing notes into the computer. "Call security," I said, my voice shaking, "and get Dr. Whitaker on the phone." "Is everything okay?" she asked, but she was already reaching for the phone. "I don't know," I answered, and I meant it. Dr. Whitaker arrived within 15 minutes. Impressive for 4:30 a.m. I explained the situation as clinically as I could, trimming out the parts that sounded insane even as I said them. Together, we walked back to bed 3. The cold was gone. The soil smell was gone. The patient lay unconscious again, eyes closed, breathing peacefully like none of it had ever happened. When Dr. Whitaker tried to wake him, the man's eyes opened instantly, and he sat up with a confused but perfectly normal expression. "Where am I?" he asked, scanning the What happened? We ran through the standard post-episode questions. His name was Jonathan Mercer. He remembered going to bed around midnight, but nothing after that until waking up in the hospital. No history of seizures. No drugs. No psychiatric issues. To him, the last 6 hours were simply gone. We kept him for observation and ran additional tests. Everything came back normal. By 7 a.m., as my shift ended, he was ready for discharge. A perfectly healthy man who'd had an unexplained episode. I didn't follow up. I didn't want to. But a month later, scanning the obituaries like I'd started doing, I saw his name. Jonathan Mercer, 34. Died suddenly in his sleep. No cause of death listed. I know how this sounds. As a doctor, I'm trained to search for rational explanations. Maybe he had an undiagnosed neurological condition. Maybe the temperature drop was coincidence. Maybe I imagined the scratching because I was tired and unsettled. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that something else was happening that night. Something not medical. Something waiting below the surface. Something that rose just enough to brush against the world of the living. I still work nights at Mercy General. I've never seen anything like it again. And I hope I never do. Sometimes, though, when I'm doing late-night rounds, I find myself avoiding that corner of the ER entirely. And sometimes, only sometimes, I think I hear it. A faint scratching somewhere beneath my feet. I know it sounds irrational, even unprofessional, but I still can't bring myself to walk back to bed 3. Some part of me is convinced that if I stood there long enough and really listened, I'd hear that scratching again. Not just in my memory, but actually rising up from beneath the floorboards. And I'm terrified of what it might mean if whatever was trying to come up that night finally makes it to the surface. My name is Dr. Marcus Webb. I've been working emergency medicine for 12 years. I chose this specialty because I loved the unpredictability, the adrenaline rush of not knowing what was coming next. People imagine the ER as chaos and tragedy, but the reality is mostly mundane. Stomach bugs. Minor injuries. People who should have gone to urgent care but didn't because fear makes us impulsive. I work at St. Catherine's, a level 2 trauma center in a city that's been fading for decades. The hospital itself is a relic of the 1970s. Those endless beige hallways, the smell of old wax on tile floors, the hum of fluorescent lights that never quite reach the corners. I used to think it was just an outdated building. Now I'm not so sure. This story happened about 3 winters ago, during one of the coldest Februaries I can remember. Back-to-back snowstorms had trapped everyone inside, and when the weather finally broke, people flooded out onto icy roads. Cabin fever, black ice, and desperation combined into one of the busiest nights of my career. I was midway through my shift when the call came. A 42-year-old woman, car accident, unconscious but with stable vitals. She'd hit a patch of ice on Highway 9 and slid into a tree, nothing unusual. We'd seen 6 accidents just like hers that night. Her name was Lisa Hartwell. According to her license, she lived 20 minutes outside the city. When the paramedics wheeled her in, I did my assessment. Classic mild concussion. A nasty bump on the forehead but no obvious fractures, normal breathing, pupils responsive. I expected her to wake up within the hour complaining of a headache and some memory gaps. We settled her in bed 7, ordered a CT scan and blood work, and moved on. Nights like this don't leave time to linger. I had a kid with a broken wrist, an elderly man with chest pains, and a woman convinced her new shampoo was killing her. Standard Tuesday night chaos. About an hour later, while suturing a cut on someone's hand, I heard a voice from bed 7. Lisa was awake. Relief, one less thing to worry about. I finished my sutures and went to check on her. She was sitting up in bed, looking confused but alert. Her CT had come back normal, so I was already thinking about discharge. "How are you feeling, Ms. Hartwell?" I asked, pulling up her chart. "I'm okay, I think," she said. Her voice was steady but carried a strange hesitance. "My head hurts, but that's probably normal, right?" "Absolutely normal," I said. "You hit your head pretty hard. Can you tell me what you remember about tonight?" She pressed her fingertips to her temples like she was trying to line up puzzle pieces. "I was driving home from work. Late night at the office. I got on the highway and then, She paused, frowning. This is going to sound weird, but I remember everything. Everything about the accident? No, she said, shaking her head slowly. Everything about being unconscious. I remember lying in the car after I hit the tree. I remember the paramedics arriving, what they said to each other. I remember the ride to the hospital. I remember you examining me. I remember the CT scan. All of it. But I was unconscious the whole time. I felt a chill but kept my face neutral. In 12 years, I'd never had a patient describe with perfect clarity events they should have been unaware of. Some have dreamlike recollections after trauma, sure, but not like this. Sometimes after head injuries, people have vivid dreams that feel like memories, I explained. It's not uncommon. No, Dr. Webb, she said, and the way she said my name froze me. I hadn't introduced myself. I wasn't wearing a name tag. It wasn't a dream. I heard you tell the nurse my pupils looked good. I heard you say my blood pressure was 140/90. I heard the radiologist call and say my CT was normal. She was right about all of it. Even the radiologist call, which had happened at the nurse's station nowhere near her bed. I heard other things too, she whispered. What kind of things? Lisa's eyes darted around then locked on mine. I heard you on the phone with your ex-wife about your daughter's soccer tournament. I heard Nurse Patricia talking about her son's drug problem with the social worker. I heard Dr. Kim in bed 4 telling that elderly man his chest pains were probably anxiety, but she was worried it might be something worse. I felt my stomach tighten. She was describing private conversations word for word, things she had no possible way of knowing. And then she said something I'll never forget. Dr. Webb. I didn't just hear things. I saw things too. Things moving under the floor. Trying to get up. Her words hit me like ice water. That corner of the same one where, months later, I'd stand paralyzed in bed 3, hearing that scratching, suddenly felt colder. I wanted to tell myself it was coincidence. A confabulation from a concussed brain. But her eyes, alert, terrified, pleading, told me she believed every word. It's been 3 years, but I still replay that night in my head. I still work at St. Catherine's. I still handle car accidents and heart attacks and anxious patients at 3 a.m. But no matter how many shifts I work, no matter how many patients I see, I avoid bed 3. Because sometimes, when the hall is quiet and the lights hum just right, I swear I can feel the floor vibrate faintly under my shoes. Like something stirring. Like something waiting. And I'm afraid of what it means if it ever makes it to the surface. My stomach dropped. The conversation with my ex-wife had taken place in the break room during my dinner break. Patricia's hushed discussion about her son's addiction had happened near the pharmacy at the opposite end of the ER. And Dr. Kim's quiet consultation with the chest pain patient took place behind a closed curtain in bed 4. There was no possible way Lisa could have overheard any of those conversations, not if she'd been unconscious, and not even if she'd been awake and roaming the halls. How do you know all that? I asked, trying to keep the uneasiness out of my voice. I don't know, she said, and I could see she meant it. Her eyes had that glassy, unsettled look people get when they're saying something they almost don't want to believe themselves. It's like I was everywhere at once. I could see the whole ER from above. I could hear every conversation. Watch every patient. Like I wasn't here. She swallowed, then added softly, I saw the man in bed 2 hiding pills in his socks so you wouldn't know he'd taken them before coming in. I watched the teenager in bed 6 texting her dealer while her parents weren't looking. I heard the homeless woman in triage talking to someone who wasn't there. Every single thing she said was accurate. The man in bed 2 had been hiding pills. We'd found them later. The teenager was a known regular, always chasing prescriptions. And the homeless woman had been speaking animatedly to some invisible companion as she came through the door. Lisa described it all with a quiet certainty that made my skin crawl. I need to ask you something, Lisa said, leaning forward slightly. And I need you to be honest with me. I nodded, though my pulse was starting to thrum in my ears. Was I dead? The question hung in the air like frost. Dead? Absolutely not. Your vitals were stable the entire time, I said. But I wasn't breathing normally, was I? Her eyes flicked toward the ceiling as though replaying something. I remember feeling like I was floating, like I was watching everything from somewhere else. And I remember seeing my body lying in that car, and it looked, she paused, searching for the word, empty. I pulled up her ambulance report on the computer. The paramedics had noted her breathing was shallow and irregular at first, requiring supplemental oxygen. Not unusual for someone who'd been unconscious, but in the context of everything she was telling me, it felt like a puzzle piece sliding ominously into place. I saw something else too, she said quietly. Something I'm not sure I should tell you about. What did you see? I asked. Lisa's eyes flicked around there again, then locked on mine. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I saw the little girl. A chill skittered down my spine. What little girl? The one who follows you around sometimes. She has brown hair in pigtails, wearing a yellow dress. She was standing next to you when you were examining me. But she looked sad. Really, really sad. The room suddenly felt colder. My throat went dry. My daughter Emma had died in a car accident 4 years ago. She was 7 years old. Brown hair. Pigtails. A yellow dress with little flowers, her favorite. Lisa could not have known that. No one at work knew. I'd made sure of it. How do you know about? I started to ask, but the words jammed in my throat. She wants you to know she's okay, Lisa said softly. She wants you to stop blaming yourself. She said the accident wasn't your fault and she's not in pain anymore. I had to step back from the bed. My hands were trembling. My chest felt tight, like I'd been running. Emma's death had been the darkest moment of my life. The guilt, the endless what-ifs, the way I'd replayed that day over and over until it had eaten my marriage and almost my career. And here was a stranger speaking words she couldn't possibly know. I'm sorry, Lisa called after me as I stepped into the hall. I didn't mean to upset you. I just thought you should know. I spent the next few minutes in the break room trying to steady my breathing. When I came back, Lisa was sitting quietly, staring at her hands. Her discharge paperwork was ready. Medically, there was no reason to keep her. Miss Hartwell, I said carefully, approaching her bed. Your test results all look normal. You're free to go home, but I want you to have someone drive you. And if you experience any worsening headaches, nausea, or confusion, you need to come back immediately. She nodded, then looked up at me. Dr. Webb, I want you to know that I'm not crazy. I know how all this sounds, but I'm telling you the truth about what I experienced. I don't understand it any more than you do. I believe you, I said, and to my surprise, I realized I meant it. As she gathered her belongings, she turned back to me one last time. She also wanted me to tell you she likes watching you help people. She's proud of you for becoming a doctor. Emma had died 2 months before I started medical school. She used to say she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up, just like Daddy was going to be. Lisa left that night, and I never saw her again. A few weeks later, out of curiosity, I tried looking her up to see if she'd had any follow-up care or similar episodes. But there was no trace of her anywhere. No phone listing. No social media. No address matching the one on her license. It was like she had simply disappeared back into wherever she'd come from. I still don't know what happened that night. Maybe it was a near-death experience. Maybe it was something else entirely, something our instruments can't measure, something I'm not sure I even want to understand. But one thing I do know, for the first time in 4 years, I felt like Emma was really okay. The guilt that had been eating me alive began to fade. I started to heal. Sometimes, on quiet nights I catch myself glancing at bed 7, half expecting to see Lisa sitting there with that same knowing look in her eyes. And sometimes I think I catch a flicker of yellow in the corner of my vision, like a little dress turning a corner just out of sight. Part of me hopes it's just my imagination. Part of me isn't so sure. Because some encounters are meant to happen only once. And some messages are too powerful, or too dangerous, to risk hearing twice. My name is Dr. Abigail Warren, and for the past 9 years I've worked emergency medicine at Metropolitan General Hospital in Chicago. It's a level 1 trauma center, the kind of place where chaos is the daily language, gunshot wounds, car wrecks, overdoses, everything in between. I chose this work because I thrive under pressure. But even after nearly a decade in the trenches, I sometimes wonder if the hospital itself changes you. If all that pain, all that desperation, leaves its mark in ways you don't immediately see. Metropolitan General is a strange mix of old and new. The ER looks modern enough, but if you've been there long enough, you start to notice its bones. Exposed pipes that don't seem to go anywhere. Storage closets shaped like no architect ever planned them. Hallways that dead end into bricked-up walls, reminders of wings torn down decades ago. The place has a history you can feel if you stay past midnight, and back when I worked nights, I swear the hospital felt alive in a way it didn't during the day. For my first 5 years, I lived those nights, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 days a week. You see a different kind of suffering in those hours. Bar fights gone too far, broken families spilling into exam rooms, overdoses that arrive too late to reverse. Night shifts give the hospital a pulse of its own. You either fall into rhythm with it or it swallows you. This story happened during my final month on nights, about 4 years ago. I'd just gotten engaged and wanted a schedule closer to normal life, closer to daylight. I didn't know it then, but what happened that October would not only haunt me but make me question whether leaving nights was really my choice, or if something wanted me gone. It was a Thursday at 2:15 a.m. when paramedics called in a code blue transport. Male, approximately 60 years old. Found unresponsive in his apartment, no pulse, no respirations, downtime unknown. In this line of work, we get plenty of code blues. Most don't end with survival. Still, protocol is protocol, you fight for them anyway. 10 minutes later, he arrived. His name was Vincent Reeves, according to his wallet. Gray hair, flannel shirt, worn jeans. A man who looked like life had been hard on him long before this. Pupils fixed, no heartbeat, classic cardiac arrest. My team and I went through the motions like a choreographed dance. Compressions, airway, meds. I called the rhythm, my nurses and residents followed. For 15 long minutes, we pushed against the silence of death. And then, against the odds, we got him back. His pulse returned, his chest rose with breath, blood pressure stable. We intubated him and transferred him upstairs to the ICU. On paper, it was a clean win. A save. But in the pit of my stomach, something felt unfinished. I barely had time to process before the call came. An ICU nurse, her voice tight. "Dr. Warren, you need to come up. The patient you just sent us, he's awake. And he's asking for you by name." My name. That stopped me cold. He'd been unconscious the entire time he was in my care. I hadn't introduced myself. My name badge isn't visible during codes. There was no way he should have known who I was. And yet, an hour after being clinically dead, Vincent Reeves was not only awake, he was waiting for me. When I entered his ICU room, he was sitting up, breathing on his own, looking more alive than he had any right to. His eyes fixed on mine the second I walked in. "Dr. Warren," he said, with a smile that wasn't relief, wasn't gratitude. It was something else. Something that made me want to step back. "I've been waiting for you." I tried to steady my voice. "How do you know my name, Mr. Reeves?" That smile widened, though it never reached his eyes. "Because I know a lot of things now. Things I couldn't have known before. I know you ended your engagement last month after discovering his betrayal. I know about the scar on your left shoulder from when you were a child. And I know you've been thinking of leaving emergency medicine, though you've told no one." Every word was true. Things buried so deeply, so privately, that hearing them spoken aloud felt like being undressed under a spotlight. "How could you possibly know that?" I asked. "Because I was gone," he said simply. 15 minutes and 37 seconds, to be exact. Gone from here, but not gone. I saw things, about you, about this hospital, about what happens between the living and the dead. I sat down beside his bed, partly because I wanted answers, partly because my legs suddenly felt too weak to hold me. "What kind of things?" I asked. That's when I noticed the smell. Subtle at first, cutting through the antiseptic air of the ICU. Not bleach, not plastic tubing or latex gloves. This was something older. Rich, damp, unmistakable, like soil after a rainstorm. Vincent leaned closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw the truth of this place. The mistakes. The blood that was never cleaned. I saw what really happened in room 314 back in 1987, when a nurse gave the wrong medication and 3 patients died before sunrise. And in that moment, the hospital around me, its old pipes, its bricked-up hallways, its restless personality, suddenly didn't feel like just a building anymore. It felt like something listening. I saw the pediatric patient who was buried in the walls during the 1995 renovation, Vincent said flatly. I saw the doctor who's been stealing medications for months, pawning them off to feed his gambling addiction. My breath caught. Room 314, he had mentioned it earlier. It had been sealed off long before my time at Metropolitan. I'd only heard scraps of rumor, whispers passed between nurses during late-night shifts. Supposedly, an accident in the 1980s. Some said a patient died. Some swore more than one. The truth had been bricked up with the door. As for the renovation in the 90s, I knew of it but never details. The mention of a child, buried, wasn't something anyone had ever dared say out loud. And the doctor? That accusation I couldn't dismiss so easily. Given what Vincent had already exposed about my personal life, I didn't doubt he could see rot behind the walls of this hospital, rot no one else wanted to admit. I saw you too, he said, his voice tightening. I saw the real reason you became a doctor. It wasn't about saving people. It was about what happened to your little brother. I froze. My stomach turned to ice. David. My brother David, gone at 14 from leukemia. His death was the silent cornerstone of my life, the reason I had chased medicine, the reason I had pushed myself into chaos every day. And I'd never, not once, spoken of him at work. How? My voice cracked. How do you know that? Vincent's smile spread wider, too wide. His teeth caught the fluorescent light and I realized, horrified, that they weren't just discolored. They looked darker, as if soaked in something that had seeped into him from the grave. I saw the patients who never made it out of this ER, he whispered. The ones who flatlined here, who bled out on your tables. They're still here, Dr. Warren. All of them. Stuck in the spaces between the walls, the floors, between one heartbeat and the next. I wanted to tell him he was delirious. That it was trauma, confusion, oxygen deprivation. But my skin prickled because some part of me already knew the truth. They're angry, Vincent continued, his voice now layered, like other voices echoed faintly beneath his. Angry because of you. Angry because you pulled them back when they were ready to go. Every time you save someone, every time you restart a heart, you tear them away from where they were meant to be. The room felt smaller. Heavier. My throat tightened. That doesn't make sense, I managed. But the protest was weak even to my own ears. Doesn't it? Vincent tilted his head, studying me like a specimen. Haven't you noticed the patterns? Patients who should have died keep coming back, again and again, with accidents no one should survive. Haven't you noticed your colleagues waking from nightmares drenched in sweat, whispering about the hospital? Haven't you felt how the air itself has grown darker, heavier, colder? He was right. God help me, he was right. Over the past months, I'd felt it too. Patients with impossible luck, or impossible curses, arriving at our doors over and over. Nurses talking about shadows they swore followed them home. That lingering weight in the air, as if the hospital itself was breathing down our necks. What are you saying I should do? I asked, my voice barely audible. Stop fighting, Vincent said. When it's their time, let them go. Stop dragging the dead back into the world of the living. You're tearing the veil too thin. And once it rips, nothing will hold it back. I wanted to argue that saving lives was my calling, that I had sworn to fight for every heartbeat. But staring at Vincent, with his darkened teeth, his grave dirt smell, and those impossible truths spilling from his mouth, the words would not come. I have to go, I said, pushing myself to my feet. Of course you do, he murmured. But remember, we'll be watching. All of us. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I left the ICU and forced myself back to there, but nothing felt real anymore. Each patient I saw blurred into the echo of Vincent's warning. Every decision weighed heavier. His voice followed me into every exam room. Every life you save comes with a price. By 7 a.m., I signed out and left, calling in sick for the next 3 days. I couldn't bring myself to walk through those doors again. When I finally returned, I asked about Vincent Reeves. The ICU nurse said he'd gone into sudden arrest the very next night. No revival this time. She called it unusual. I called it inevitable. I transitioned to day shifts shortly after, on paper, for my engagement. But that relationship had already ended. The truth? I couldn't face another night knowing that Vincent, or the thing that had spoken through him, was waiting in the dark. I still work at Metropolitan. I still save lives. But I hesitate now in ways I never did before. When a patient's injuries are catastrophic, when the heart has been still too long, when everything in me screams it's their time to go, I sometimes wonder if letting go is mercy, not failure. And late at night, finishing charts under the hum of hospital lights, I sometimes catch it again. That smell. Earthy. When it reaches me, I know it's time to leave. Because if I stay too long, I can almost hear them whispering in the vents. Waiting. Watching.
You learn to ignore certain things when you've worked hospice long enough. The creaking pipes, the flicker of bad fluorescent bulbs, even the sounds people make when they're slipping away. It's not heartless, it's survival. You focus on the care, on the comfort, on being present. You keep your mind on the living, not the dying. That night, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No rustling. No coughing from room 6. No TV noise from old Mr. Latham, who never slept. And strangest of all, no meows. Marzipan, our hospice cat, wasn't pacing the halls like she usually did. She wasn't curling up outside one of the rooms like she was picking her next vigil. She was just sitting, right in front of the supply closet door, perfectly still, staring. Her tail flicked once, slow and deliberate, and then she growled, low long, not playful like she sometimes did with new staff. It sounded almost protective. I should have listened to that. But I didn't. Not first. I chalked it up to mice. That closet was warm and often got cluttered. Maybe she heard scratching. But when I opened it, just to check, there was nothing. Just folded linens, a mop bucket, extra PPE. I even shuffled some things around, just in case. Marzipan stayed where she was, her ears twitching back, eyes locked on the far end of the closet, like she knew I was missing something. I remember saying, "You're being dramatic, girl," with a nervous little laugh. I shut the door and got back to work. Vitals, notes, morphine doses. It was a skeleton crew that night, just me, a CNA named Roxy, and Miguel at the front desk. Standard for winter in this part of Maine, where the snow falls thick and slow, like a blanket you can't shake off. But something fell off. At 11:43 p.m., Marzipan had moved, but not far. Now she was lying in front of the supply door, paws tucked neatly, still watching. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't respond when Roxy tried to pet her. She just stared. That's when Roxy said what we'd all joked about in the past, except now she didn't sound like she was joking. She's waiting for someone to die. Marzipan had always had a sixth sense. I'd seen it more than once. She'd curl up outside room 4, and by morning, that bed would be empty. The families found it comforting, like their loved one wasn't alone. But the staff, some of us started to dread her stillness. That night, though, she wasn't by a patient's door. She was guarding something else entirely. Around 3:11 a.m., the hallway lights flickered. Just once, like a breath pulled in and held too long. Then, dead silence. That was when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic scratching. So faint I thought it was my own breath at first. But no, it was behind the supply shelves. Something, or someone, scraping at the wall, like claws, dull and methodical, pacing a line I couldn't trace. I called out, half-heartedly, "Miguel, you hear that?" He didn't answer. Neither did Roxy. I opened the supply closet again, slower this time. The air inside felt warmer than it should have, like someone had been breathing in there. I stood still, listened, and that's when I caught a smell. Not bleach, not linen. It was musty, damp, and underneath it, something metallic. Like blood, but there was nothing. No one. I shut the door fast and didn't open it again. Just before sunrise, I walked past room 2, where Mr. Everett had been checked in just 2 days ago. He'd come in with fatigue, a persistent cough, and a mild infection. Nothing terminal. His family wasn't even expecting to stay the night. But the monitor was flatlined. He was gone. Just like that. No signs. No gasping. No struggle. Just gone. I remember looking at the cat then, but Marzipan was nowhere in sight. We searched the building, thinking she might have slipped outside. Thuff, it was 10 below zero. Roxy finally found something in the east corridor. The vent cover above the hallway had popped loose. And just beneath it, caught on the jagged edge, were clumps of orange fur. 12 feet off the ground. No paw prints. No blood. No sound. Just those tufts of hair, swaying gently from the air that whispered out of the duct. We never found Marzipan after that. Not her body. Not a trace. Behind the wall, and beneath it, long, deep scratches dug into the concrete, like something had been trying to claw its way out. I still worked the night shift. Still chart vitals. Still comfort families through the worst moments of their lives. But every now and then, I catch myself staring at the supply door, waiting, because sometimes, just for a second, I think I hear it again. That same slow, steady scratching. And when I do, I don't check the closet anymore. I just walk away. Thank you to all my amazing viewers for joining me in these chilling, emotional journeys. If this story moved you or gave you goosebumps, hit that like button and subscribe to join us deeper in the shadows. Every like breathes life into another tale, and every subscriber becomes part of our growing circle of listeners. Now, take a deep breath because our next chilling story is just around the corner. I didn't want to shift. I'd picked up 3 doubles already that week, and my body was running on coffee and muscle memory. But Ray had called out sick, and we were short-staffed as usual, so I nodded and clocked in for the night. Quiet nights were rare, but sometimes silence is worse than chaos. It was the way the building breathed that got me first. The hospice was built into the east wing of what used to be St. Callista's Asylum, a towering, stone-clad relic that had long outlived its original purpose. Most of the place had been shut down for decades, with only this wing remaining operational. The rest? Boarded up, gutted by asbestos, left to time and rot. You could feel in the walls, like they remembered every scream, every silence, every soul that was never really free to leave. The hall was dim that night, just the emergency lights humming with a soft, yellow glow. The usual residents were asleep or medicated into peace. Except roommate, Miss Lively, new patient, no family, mid-80s, late-stage dementia. I'd read her intake file on my break. She used to be an antiques dealer, then a hoarder, living alone in a crumbling Victorian until the city declared it unfit for occupancy. EMS had found her sitting among stacks of yellowed newspapers and broken dolls, muttering to a cracked mirror. She didn't speak much in the daytime, but that night, when I checked on her, she was awake, staring at the wall behind her bed, lips moving like she was whispering to someone just out of earshot. "She keeps feeding them," she said without looking at me. "Or they get hungry." I asked her what she meant. She just chuckled and held up an old butterscotch candy in a crinkled wrapper. Then she rolled it under the bed like a marble. That's when Domino started acting strange. Now, we always joked about Domino being the most dramatic cat alive. He strutted like he owned the hospice, ignored people unless they were dying, and had a habit of squeezing himself into impossibly small places. But that night, he was more than dramatic. He was disturbed. He slinked into room 8 around 11 p.m., and I didn't see him come out for hours. When I peeked in later, he was under Miss Lively's bed, ears flat, growling at the far corner like something was down there with him. I crouched to look, but of course there was nothing. Then the scratching started. Faint at first, barely audible, a soft drag of something against plaster. It came from behind the bed, the wall Miss Lively wouldn't stop watching. I told myself it was mice. Old buildings like that always had rodents. But Domino's bristled so hard he looked twice his size. And when I tried to pick him up, he hissed at me, then jumped onto the dresser. And that's when I saw it. He was standing there, rigid, staring into the vent above Miss Lively's head. A square of black metal about the size of a loaf of bread. The cover was missing. It had been like that for months, a maintenance issue no one got around to fixing. But what disturbed me wasn't the open vent. My chest tightened. I looked back toward the hallway, empty. When I stepped fully into room 9, Matilda jumped off the sill and slinked toward Mr. Henrik's bed. That's when he woke up, gasping like he'd come up from underwater. She brought it with her, he hissed, eyes wild. Tell her to take it back. I reached to calm him, to help him lie back, but he thrashed, started screaming, clawing at his arms like something was crawling beneath his skin. Blood welled beneath his nails. When we pulled up his sleeves, the wounds didn't look like self-harm. They were long, deep, and oddly angled, like something had clawed outward from inside him. We sedated him, got him stable, logged the injuries, but I couldn't shake what he'd said. She brought it with her. I went back to check the hallway. Matilda was gone. She didn't reappear for hours. But the air changed. You could feel it, like the oxygen was heavier, like static in your ears that never let up. And that smell, rotten fabric, hot metal. Everyone noticed it, but no one said anything. Because what could you say? At 2 a.m., I finally told Jordan, our tech, about what I saw, about Matilda being in 2 places at once. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Said he'd pull the security tapes to prove my hallucination. I waited while he loaded the footage from room 3, room 9, and the main hallway. What we saw made the air in that room drop 10 degrees. At 10:31 p.m., Matilda entered room 3, sat by the bed. At the exact same moment, on all 3 feeds, Matilda entered each room. Room 3, room 9, and the hallway camera. Same posture, same timing, same flick of her tail, all simultaneously. That's not possible, Jordan whispered. Then we loaded the final 45 minutes of Mr. Henrik's footage. There was nothing, just static, a faint purring in the audio track. But no image, no record of his attack, no Matilda, no screaming, just a flicker of white noise and a sound like wind filtered through a throat. We checked the other rooms. Same thing. Several had brief blackouts, a few with odd timestamps, glitches we thought, but always pair with that same sound. And that smell. Over the next 2 days, 3 patients passed suddenly. No prior signs, no pain, just stillness. Like someone had reached in and stopped their hearts gently, without warning. We found Matilda on the 3rd day. Or rather, I did. I'd gone down to the cold storage to retrieve something for the night nurse. One of the freezer drawers had jammed halfway open. When I pulled it free, I nearly screamed. There she was, curled inside like she'd been placed there. Fur pristine, eyes closed, purring and humming. A low, vibrating hum that I felt in my teeth more than I heard. Her mouth wasn't moving, but the sound was there, radiating from her chest. I picked her up. She was warm, dry, calm. I asked everyone if they'd put her there as a joke. No one had. We ran more footage. The cameras showed the freezer drawer opening at 3:03 a.m. No one touched it. No one came or went. The drawer simply slid open. By itself. Matilda hasn't acted strange since. She still walks the halls. Still curls into laps. Still flicks her tail with that same lazy rhythm. But I don't trust her anymore. Because some nights, when I'm the only one left on the floor, I hear her purring behind closed doors. Then I check, and the room is empty. Other nights, I see her sitting in one hallway, and then again at the end of the other. Identical, unmoving, waiting. I keep my mouth shut now. I do my job. I treat the living. But I've stopped watching the cameras. And I never go near the freezer drawer after dark. There's a rhythm to working hospice. A kind of quiet that seeps into your bones after midnight. Some nights, it's peaceful. The slow breath of tide and wind outside the windows. The gentle hush of patients resting. But other nights, it hums. Like something under the floorboards is pacing. I've been on for 6 nights straight. Back-to-back graveyard shifts. Staff was short, patients were high-need, and my body was running on caffeine, cheap vending machine soup, and pure stubbornness. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking up. It was sometime after 3 a.m. The staff lounge was dark except for the weak emergency light above the microwave. The vinyl couch beneath me groaned when I shifted. And there she was, Elspeth, the hospice cat. She was curled on my chest, her paws tucked neatly beneath her. Her yellow eyes wide, unblinking, locked on mine. I remember thinking she felt heavier than usual, like she was made of stone or waterlogged wool. Her fur was slick, soaked through, and her purring, God, her purring, it sounded like it was coming from inside my skull. Then I saw it, seaweed, wrapped around my fingers, tangled and damp and stinking of salt and decay, like it had just been dragged from the shoreline. The thing is, we're not close enough to the water for that. The cliff edge is a 5-minute walk from the facility. Locked gates, fenced perimeters. I never left the building, but the brine on my hands, the sand in my shoes, said otherwise. I didn't tell anyone. Chalked it up to exhaustion. A weird dream. Maybe I walked in my sleep. Maybe someone was messing with me. But the next night, it happened again. I dreamed I was in the ocean, not floating, sinking, pulled under by invisible hands, the cold like knives in my chest. And above me, on the rocks, Elspeth sat, perfectly dry, perfectly still, watching me disappear beneath the surface. When I woke up, I was gasping, and my shoes were wet again. The other nurses started noticing things, too. Rory, the CNA, said she'd seen an old patient, Mr. Delaney, walking the hallway. He'd passed 2 weeks ago. Clear as day, she said. He nodded at me and turned the corner. She thought it was stress. She thought she imagined it. But I know she didn't, because that same night, I passed room 12, the room he died in, and found Elspeth sitting just outside the door, her eyes fixed on something inside. I looked. Nothing was there, but the window was open. Wind howling, salt in the air. Then Rory vanished. Just stepped out for a smoke break and never came back. Security footage showed her walking toward the side entrance. Then nothing, not even static, just gone. They brought in search dogs, drones, nothing. The cliffs out back are steep, jagged, and merciless in winter. They assumed the worst. I assumed otherwise. I started following Elspeth. I had to know. I had to see where she went after she watched me sleep, after the others started dreaming of waves and drowning in cold fingers. She would always disappear after 2 a.m., slinking down the hallway, pausing only once to look over her shoulder, like she was waiting for me. One night, I followed her outside. I don't know why I didn't stop. The wind was cutting through my jacket like needles. Rain had turned to sleet, but she moved like she didn't feel the cold at all. She kept walking down the overgrown path behind the hospice, past the rusted no-access sign, right to the cliff's edge. And that's where she stopped. Her tail flicked once. Then she turned to look at me and vanished. No leap, no stumble, just gone, like fog burned off by moonlight. I didn't sleep that night. Haven't really slept since. The next day, she was back, sitting on the staff desk like she'd never left. But something was wrong. Her left eye, once golden, was now milky white, like it had been rolled in glass. She blinked slow, watched me harder than she ever had before. Her purr had changed too. It wasn't a sound anymore. Not really. It was more like a vibration that got under your skin, a pressure behind the eyes. Like the ocean, low, endless, ancient. I moved out of the lounge, started doing my charting in the hallway under the lights. Told the others I prefer to be near the patients. But really, I was terrified of sleeping, because every time I close my eyes now, I see her, on the rocks, waiting. And when I wake up, my lips taste like salt. I've walked through a lot of old buildings in my time. Nursing homes gone bankrupt, hospitals stripped to bare studs, even a few morgues that got turned into community centers. But none of them felt like this place. It was the stillness. Not peaceful, not silent, just paused, like everything was waiting to start moving again. They called it Rose Hill Hospice. Once a pediatric facility perched just outside Albany, it had been closed for over a decade after the funding dried up. No scandal, no tragedy, just left behind. The city approved its demolition. A company was contracted to clear out the last of the furniture and medical equipment before the wrecking crews came through. I was hired on as a short-term nurse consult to help catalog anything sensitive, medication records, intake logs, a few old patient files. It was supposed to be quiet work. A clipboard, a flashlight, a dust mask. No patients, no families, just echoes, and a cat. She was ginger, lean, and clearly old, but she looked healthy. Too healthy for a place that had been sealed up this long. The demolition foreman called her Rusty but the name didn't suit her. She moved too silently, watched too intently, always just out of reach. She didn't leave. Even when the trucks rumbled up and the floodlights clicked on, she stayed, wandering the hallways like she still had work to do. I noticed her scratching at the same door every day. Room 24. But here's the thing. The intake logs said there were only 23 patients when Rosehill shut down. 23 children. 23 rooms. And yet room 24 was very real. At the end of the west hallway, locked tight. No nameplate. No records. No key. The others said it must have been an old storage room. But Rusty, or whatever she was, kept going back, scratching at the base of the door, sitting outside it for hours, tail twitching. One night, I swore I heard her howling. Not like a cat, like something being called. I started sleeping in the admin office, just for a couple nights. The hotel was a 30-minute drive, and the weather had turned nasty. I figured I'd finish faster if I stayed on site. That's when the weird stuff began. I brought in an old baby monitor, just to test one that was left behind. It was meant for a storage bin. I wasn't expecting to hear anything. But around 2 a.m., while I was going through the last of the supply closet logs, it crackled to life. Laughter. Children's laughter. Not recorded. Not distorted. Not far away. Close. Clear. And playful. I froze. Let the monitor sit on the desk for a minute. Then it went quiet. That night, I walked past room 24 again. I didn't mean to. It was just on my way to the kitchen. But something had changed. There were faint footprints in the dust outside the door. Small, bare, leading toward the hallway and disappearing before they reached the corner. I didn't sleep much after that. The next day, I found a stack of old crayon drawings in one of the nurses' break room cubbies. Most are what you'd expect: flowers, stick figures, sunshine. But one set had been tucked between two training manuals. They were different. All of them showed the same two figures, a nurse and a cat. In one, the nurse was holding hands with several children, smiling. In another, the nurse stood at the edge of a cliff, the cat curled around his feet. And in the last one, the lines scribbled hard like the child had drawn in a frenzy. The nurse was inside a burning building, windows glowing red, but smiling. Always smiling. I looked closer. The nurse's face was mine. I told myself I was imagining things, that the features were generic, that it was coincidence. But it wasn't. There was even a name scribbled in crayon in the corner of one. Cass' son. Not quite right, but close enough. On the final night before demolition, I couldn't help myself. I walked to room 24, and the door was open. The hallway behind me went quiet. Even the hum of the portable generator outside dulled, like sound had been swallowed. The room was dim, dust swirling in the beam of my flashlight, but the walls were alive with drawings. Hundreds of them, all done in crayon, paper taped haphazardly to peeling paint, all showing the same nurse, the same cat, the same fire. And in the very center of the room, drawn directly onto the drywall, was a final image. A bed, empty, but beneath it, in big red letters, room for one more. That's the last thing I remember clearly. I must have blacked out. There's a gap in my memory I can't explain. 1 second I was inside that room, and the next I was outside on the lawn, gasping, barefoot, covered in soot. The building was on fire. By the time the first engines arrived, Rosehill was engulfed. A controlled demolition no longer necessary. They searched the wreckage for remains, maybe a squatter, maybe a curious worker. But no one was found. No body, at least. Except for the cat. She was sitting on a scorched beam that had fallen across what used to be room 24. Fur spotless, eyes bright, watching the space where the door had been. Waiting. They said I was lucky, that I must have escaped and gone into shock. But I know I didn't escape. I was let go, because whatever was in that room, it still wants company. Thank you all for joining me on these deeply human journeys. Your support means the world, and reading your reactions and your own personal experiences in the comments. It's one of the most meaningful parts of this work. If these stories gave you chills or made you pause and reflect, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more. We explore the haunting, the emotional, the unexplained, and always with reverence. Have you ever had an experience like John's? Or maybe you have your own story of an unexplainable presence, a quiet moment that still echoes in your heart. I'd love to hear it in the comments below. Each of your stories adds something special to this growing community of listeners, of feelers, of souls who believe there's more out there than we often see. And if someone you know might appreciate a good scare or a good cry, please share this video with them. There's more to come, more stories to tell. And remember, sometimes the scariest tales are the ones that could happen to any of us. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video if you dare.